I'm going to start this morning with whakatauki. I've chosen this whakatauki because it really, I think, sets the scene for our session today around celebrating diversity. So feel free to mute though, but say along, on mute, say along with me. Whakatauki around bird call and being united. Whakarango a te ki te tangi a te mahu. Te karanga ki tui, 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 tui a. Tui a I rongo, tui I raro, tui I roto, tui I waho, tui I te tere tangi. Thank you everyone. We're welcome about our session on approaches to inclusive teaching. So today, what are we going to look at in the next under an hour? We're looking at the session around innovative approaches to inclusive teaching. And these online sessions have been based on the ACE teaching standards. So that's where the topics have come from for each of the sessions. So the ACE teaching standards, find out more about at any stage, but they're designed specifically for people who are working with teaching and learning in the public sector. And they really set the scene for what makes a good tutor. So this is our kaupapa for this session, and obviously it's fitting the theme around looking at inclusive teaching. I'm going to use some research about different ways of working with learners, and also talk about some advantages of working in an inclusive as an inclusive educator, and I'll call on you to share your opinion on it as well. I'm going to share some approaches and strategies of being as effective as possible. And we'll talk a little bit about critical consciousness, about how to reflect on your own practice, think about perhaps ways that you are being as inclusive as possible, and how we teach to learn in diversity. This is just a bit of an intro to me. I have had over 30 years working as an educator, an adult educator, and at the moment, as I said, I work for Upper Aotearoa, the Tertiary Teaching Excellence, but also do some work for ACE as well. My background is working as an educator in various places. You can see there the prison, the university, and other places. And my heart's always been with adult community education. So it's great to be able to connect again with ACE. Feel free also to contact me if you have any questions anytime too. What we're going to look at, as I said earlier, was around the ACE teaching standards. Just for those of you who are not familiar with those, you can find those on the ACE website. But I'm addressing in this online session 1.2 under commitment, so looking at some learning, design for learning with inclusive and effective teaching approaches. So remember those standards there are helping all of us and reminders for me as well about what makes a good tutor. So I'm going to explore some ideas now around that, about what I think makes a good tutor as far as inclusive and effective teaching. And I look forward to hearing from you some of your ideas shortly too when we break into the breakout groups. So on the screen now, I've got a circle with some green dots in it. And I've done that purposefully because I'm going to refer to some research that was undertaken in 2017. And the researcher uses green dots quite a bit in her research, and you'll see that shortly. So she talks about ākonga learners in a way that she sees as working with learners as being most of our learners. So do you think they're all the same learners? Anyone would like to answer that question? Or are you shaking your head, Tess? Yeah, no, it looks like you're shaking your head. No, they're not the same. Why aren't they the same? They all look the same. I've put green dots there and representative of our learners. Aren't all our learners the same? Anyone care to share why they think they're not all the same?
Because they bring with them different kind of, learning backgrounds. They have different skills different values, different, learning levels that they might bring from outside this classroom. So they might be in this classroom, but outside this classroom, they bring a lot of, their kitty of knowledge would be of different levels as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Amina. Right. Anyone else care to say, answer that question? Do you think they're all the same?
My learners have just started this week. They wear a uniform, they have a bun, they all look the same.
Sure.
Yeah, different ages, different ethnicities,
Yes.
different education background, different attitude, different willingness to be there, all sorts of stuff that they look the same, but they're very different.
Indeed, look the same but very different. Yeah, I like that test. Yeah. I mean, it is probably a bit of an obvious question, isn't it? Because I'm sure all of you are appreciative that our ARCOMA, even though, as Tessa said, they can look the same if they're all wearing the same uniform or they're all the same age even, but of course they're not the same. And that's what we're going to be looking at, this research, that often our learners, of course, are not the same. And these coloured dots that is used in the research are as representative of how some ARCOMA are different. And that can be, as Tess and Amina have already identified, through different ways that they are different, that are visible, obviously ethnicity sometimes, obviously age sometimes, but then there's all the invisible ways that our learners are different too, perhaps carrying various neurodiversity challenges, or anxiety, or certain things that they are triggered by that we have no idea about. So that's a bit of a warm-up to this research by Shelley Moore. And now I'm just going to take you through a few slides that I've adapted from her research, where she talks about the green dots and the coloured dots as representative of most learners and some learners. So this next slide is inviting you to have a look at the different ways of working with learners. And she talks about 4 different ways. She talks about segregation, integration, exclusion, and inclusion. Now, I'm inviting you in big white letters there on the right to write this down. So grab your phone or paper or whatever you have around you and write down the numbers 1 to 4 at each of those words, please, because shortly I'm going to invite you to do a matching exercise. So write them down so you can see them, no one else needs to see them. It's just, I found this an interesting piece of research, and I challenged myself to think about these ideas around how we work differently with our learners. So hopefully you've all got that written down now, 1 to 4 with those 4 words. Because the next slide is inviting you to connect an image with one of the labels. So here's the next slide. There you see there, our green dots mean the most learners and our coloured dots being some learners. So on your piece of paper, when you write down the circle that you think matches the term, so which of those 4 match the term? Right, hopefully you've had a look at those circles with the green dots, which is most learners, and the coloured dots, which are some learners. So let's have a look at the results that Shelley Moore shared with us, shared in her research, with the identifiers in her research. So here are the results here. She's identifying there that we can look at segregation, there being number 1. We can look there at the idea of integration being number 2. See, the coloured dots are included in the green dots. And we look at the idea of exclusion, which here is really clear, isn't it? It's clear that it is excluded. People are excluded. All the green dots, most learners are inside, and some of them are excluded. And then 4 is the one around inclusion, is around everybody being included. I did think it was quite powerful for thinking about how we work with our learners. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which invites us to just reflect a little bit further on that, because in her research, Shelley Moore didn't think that inclusion circle accurately represents the richness of learners. So she believes that even though inclusion, we include the green dots, most are former, and the coloured dots, some are former, she thinks and claims that inclusion is about everybody. And I thought that I really appreciated her opinion on that, because it challenged me to think, well, I like to think I'm an inclusive educator, but perhaps I'm not. And that's what I like about research, is just looking at it and thinking further about actually how do I improve, or reflect on my practice and think, have I included everybody when I've been teaching in prisons, when I've been teaching at the university, when I've been teaching at the college? I feel like I make an effort to do it, but then I'm doing it. And so what she came up with again here, Shelley Moore, is how do we reframe the conversation? I really like this slide. I put it in the handout. I think it's quite powerful. So she thinks she's been challenging us to think rather, how do we include learners who are different? Not just that, but how to teach the learner versatile. And as I say, we'll talk more about this in the session, but I did find it really helpful for thinking further about that. I just want to go back to one slide. Sorry, I just realised there was one thing I was going to say about this. There's a book review that I read, and the link is in the handout. In the book review, the reviewer talks about the fact that ultimately the myth of 100% inclusion 100% of the time is false. So I did find that reassuring, as I said, because I like to think that I do try to be inclusive. But this book review, based on Shelley Moore's research, was saying actually we can't always be inclusive. What we need to remember is, though, that we offer choice, we make the supports available, and we create a learning environment where everyone is celebrated and everyone is learning from each other. She uses the example of what it's like to be in a family. Like we know where each family members are. We start together, we might end together, but we support each other's strengths along the way. But we're not there all of the 100% of the time with support for each other. So I found that quite helpful again for thinking about being an inclusive educator. So shortly you'll get a chance to talk, because I know you're going to listen to me for a little bit about this research, but I hope that it's provoked some ideas for thinking about your own practice and how you teach, how you work with learners, how inclusive you are. What do you do too? Let's have another look at that slide that Shelley challenged us with. So how do we reframe the conversation to how to teach to learner diversity? So how do we do that? I'm going to start with one slide and then invite you to share in the breakout rooms, because I'm sure all of you have your own approaches to teaching to diversity and ways that you're including into this group. So just to start the ball rolling, so to speak, here's just 4 ideas about inclusive teaching. And they won't be new to you, I'm sure. They don't go into great depth. They're just simple, short points about promoting diversity. So that's around deliberately cultivating a learning environment where people feel comfortable, where learners are treated equitably, easier said than done, and also that whole idea about providing equal access to learning. Then the final point there is just ensuring that our learners value and supported in their learning. So that's 4, as I said, short points about promoting diversity. I'd really love to hear how you promote diversity, but also about what are the advantages of inclusive teaching. So we'll talk a little bit more about that for the rest of the session. Here's a chance for you to talk in small groups, and thanks to Viv, she can do that. Maybe looks like we've got groups perhaps of 4 of them, if that's okay, if you break people down into breakout rooms now. Maybe perhaps write down or photograph those questions, because I know when I get to breakout rooms, I often forget what I'm meant to do. So it might be useful if you wrote that down, those 2 questions, and photographed it, whatever works for you. You'll have 10 minutes or there in the group. So please introduce yourself and talk about your practice. How are you inclusive? What do you do? And what are some of the advantages for you of being an inclusive educator in the way you teach? So what are the advantages of inclusive teaching? I might have time to ask a few of you, for some of your feedback. So if a couple of you can write that down in your answers, that would be great. Welcome back. Great to see you all. Thank you. Hopefully you had some good time to discuss those two questions. I know I had a lovely opportunity to jump into one group that was smaller and hear from a couple of people there. In fact, Lani and Tania, maybe you might like to offer some of the things you said. So feel free to answer any question there. Would anyone be brave enough, or Cherry, Lani, or Tania, any brave enough to share what you talked about in your group?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about how, well, in my own practice, how I am inclusive in my practice was really just having the teaching be learner centered. So asking lots of questions, knowing exactly who's in your group, knowing how they learn, and trialing different things, not just settling for one method of teaching and having them conform to it, but really acknowledging the fact that they do have intellectual disabilities, and so they really need they need flexibility, and they need us to be able to cater to them as much as possible.
That's great. Thank you, Lani. I really liked those ideas. And also you talked about asking questions, and finding out how they like to be treated and how they like to be. Great. Thank you. So what about another group? Anyone else who need comments about being inclusive, the advantages of inclusive teaching?
Yeah, we were just saying some of the advantages of the inclusive learning that we all practice was creates like a good bond within the group. Everyone sort of gets along with each other if you've been inclusive, and it creates a much more like a confidence inspiring group that really builds on each other. So,
yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it's great. Good to have another couple of ideas about advantages for teaching in an inclusive way. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Right, let's have a look at room 2. Do we have anyone from room 2?
I think we sort of talked a wee bit about scaffolding in different ways. Malcolm had a really good way of putting at describing his lessons, like the low entry and then the high threshold. Like anyone can start in at any level and work their way up. And it sounded like we're quite on the same, same sort of wavelength with those ideas, even though we were teaching like completely different things for a lot of us.
Right.
I had quite a mind shift. I think it was last year. What I was doing was planning my regular lesson and then having just the additional resources for my higher needs learners, and then having a bit of a mind shift that actually was still being quite othering to them, so changing my lessons so that they would be inclusive for everybody. It was a lesson for everybody rather than my regular lesson and then my blueprinted stuff for the dyslexics, or my regular lesson and then something printed out for someone else. And that's taken a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of thinking and asking ChatGPT for ideas. She's pretty good on the old ideas. But it saved time now at the back end. At the end of last year, when they're graduating, it's a lot less classroom management, a lot less, trying to get people back engaged. So yeah, it's taken thousands of hours, it feels, but it's definitely saving time in the end.
Oh, well, congratulations, Tess. Your uncle and I are really lucky to have you doing all that extra work. And, I'm sure many of you are doing the same to ensure that, your learners are learning, as included as possible and able to learn. I really appreciate you talking about the term othering, and that's important that, and the efforts to try and be inclusive, we don't do that. I know I've done that myself when I taught some Vietnamese learners here who came to the University of Canterbury to learn about teaching adults, and it was hard. I tried using graphics I thought would appeal to them, but then what I did they're so stereotypically wrong that it made them feel like, you know, they weren't included in the teaching. So I just, you know, in the learning, and I just want to share that, say that, you know, I make mistakes and it's easy, you know, I'm sure many of you have made mistakes too, but we learn from those mistakes and change. So congratulations again, Tess, on doing them. And thanks for your report back. Anyone else in room 4?
Yep. So we talked about what we do to create inclusive environments in our, you know, class settings. Is that one of the more thing that came up was creating respectful and kind of safe and empowering environment for the learners. And we also talked about the different styles of learning. So making sure that we cater to visual or oral, kinesthetic, you know, all those diverse learners. And in lessons, when you do that, then people get absorbed more attentively, because then there is something that they are actually able to do. And then also talking about the neuroscience, that when you are on a high alert, when you're not really feeling safe in an environment, your mind and brain kind of shuts down. So when we create an environment where you know, the diverse learners feel included, they feel safe, the brain that is in, you know, kind of mode of, you know, survival mode goes into the higher learning thinking mode, and learning can only happen when a person is feeling safe, and you know, the basic needs of safety and comfort are met. Only then they can actually truly learn. So just creating an environment that's safe for our learners.
Thank you for reminding us of that. I mean, that's really important. Like that. Those environments that we spend a bit of time ensuring they feel safe and feel comfortable with their learning. Thank you. That's great. And then finally, just moving on to room 5.
Okay, so I thought Margaret would speak for us, or Emil. So anyway, in that group, it was a combination of face-to-face and online. So I mostly do online. So which means because the levels are different, like for example, Margaret is holding a class for drivers, you know, the road code or driver's learner's license. And Emil is also you know, teaching adult learners, of course, like me. So we try to employ or enjoin the students or learners with different teaching techniques. For example, trying to make a breakout room or breakout session, either face-to-face or online, which means that we need to have tuwa ka na tena, or a body approach or body system. And if not body, it could be by, you know, a group with different languages and cultures. So that means one of the advantages of inclusive teaching is that we get to have learners coming from different cultures feel that they have a sense of belonging, and also that they learn from L1, you know, to L2. So L1 could be Dari, could be Sri Lankan, could be different languages and different into English, and bound as one in the class.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you. Judith talked about the concept of tuakana tena. It's written it in the chat there. If you're unfamiliar with it, feel free to Google it yourself. But I mean, essentially learning from an experience to the inexperienced person. So the concept, there's a lot more than that, but there's just very cool. But thank you all for your feedback. I really enjoyed hearing. And I put together a few advantages just to sort of kind of capture what the advantages are, and some of these you know need no further explanation because you've talked about them, you know them yourself. So here's the first one. There's just 8 that I have identified here. The first one is, as you can see there, that one of the advantages are that it's an opportunity to connect and engage with a variety of learners, for sure. So that when we have and work as an inclusive educator, that's one. The second advantages are this idea about hot moments. I haven't heard that term before, but I quite like it because sometimes there can be those times in the teaching sessions where people may be a bit conflicted, or there can be, because it says controversial material. And so that's when it's good if we have people advocating and have had you know, different experiences, different approaches, a range of diversities, they can often help with those hot moment challenges. You know. So this again is important if we, as like Tess is doing, is you know, help by providing a range of course materials. We don't just stick to the same way of doing things. We give a variety of stories of different backgrounds, ethnicities, gender, age, etc. Another advantage is the idea of the fact that people will, like as we've mentioned actually, as a couple of you mentioned already, that it's important that our learners feel comfortable so that they can voice their questions and say what it is that they want to say, how they contribute to the learners. The next advantage is the idea about learning styles, which again was mentioned earlier, so that they can feel more successful if we are inclusive and in supporting their own backgrounds and abilities. Another one idea, advantage there is that whenever we invite people to give a range of perspectives, there's enrichment for everyone. And of course, that's what the higher cause goal, not just an advantage of being inclusive is that all learners feel that they're included and involved. And then our final one there is I feel if the environment is right, like people have said already, and if you know your learners, they then can take more control of the learning themselves and take responsibility for it, which is ideal for adult learners. So there are just a range of advantages that just summarise a lot of what you were talking about again. So I just want to draw attention to the next slide and feel free to follow this up yourself. This is some great research about working with Pacific learners. And yeah, there's some great research by Shirishu Kangama talking about phenomenal educators. And she identifies the key points there that you've already talked about, that a phenomenal educator will demonstrate respect to learners, they know how to provide learning support, and they know when to listen to learners. We talked about listening, but it's a very key part of being inclusive, and has the ability to develop authentic relationships. So have a look at that at the end if you want to. Look on the Apple website for the references in the slide. And one more thing just to add into the picture here is that we actually do and have to ensure that in New Zealand, that we ensure that disabled people have good lives and get the same things as other people. So I just wanted to draw attention to that right to inclusive education from the United Nations Convention. I liked this quote from an educator that talked about the fact that whenever the person teaches, whenever I teach for myself, my assumptions impact my expectations and the opportunities that I make available. So this is just a call to recognising that we all have biases, and we carry biases, and as much as we work to ensure we don't, sadly, as an educator, we still will carry those. And so it's just challenging ourselves to think about that whenever we teach, that we're conscious of those unconscious biases that we have, and to think about how that might be preventing our learners from succeeding. I know I have a story in my own whānau with my niece and her parents when they went to visit the school teachers. My niece is Māori, and her parents couldn't help but think that the teachers had low expectations of her because they were happy when she achieved pass at CPA. And as my sister said when she spoke to the teacher, well, that's not good enough. We think that's a low expectation. We have high expectations and expect her to get some. So I guess the teacher in that scenario thought that was great that my niece was passing, but it just shows you that in a way she had expectations and something that perhaps because my niece was Māori, that she may, that was good enough, so to speak. So it's just an example of how that does still happen, that we do have expectations that are perhaps thwarted because of our own bias. There's a lot I can talk about conscious bias, but we won't have time to do that today. But I just wanted to share with you a few slides before we close about what can I do in my teaching to be as inclusive and as effective as possible. And feel free to add your own, because I will ask you shortly what's missing, what I haven't talked about. So here are a few things that I've done, or I try to do over the years to be inclusive, and I try to use some strategies that are intentional so that I send a message to a range of learners that they're not excluded. I work hard to ensure that these learners feel included. So just quickly going through these are some things that I do. I try and set up an environment to model inclusion. Having been a parent and a working parent with young children myself, and also just being respectful of adults, I very much try to keep to time. So I don't hold people up by saying, I'm going to finish in a certain time. I do. And that means that they can carry on with their commitments in life. But it doesn't necessarily need to be children. More and more adults have jobs to do as well. I often try and have in the teaching space some kind of poster or flag or item that represents, in this case, a rainbow community, so people may feel welcome there. I try and do that with the Pacifica and Maori community as well, when I just use the rainbow community, rainbow flag here in this example. I try and use Reo Maori as much as possible so that Maori students will feel as included as possible. Again, I go down to the other 3 slides at the bottom there. I try and ensure, perhaps when I can, that there's an awareness of those adults that have childcare responsibilities. So we work with timing, or I give opportunities to leave earlier for specific events, etc. That kind of thing. I try and ensure that there's easy access for people despite their disabilities, so I make it as inclusive as possible. And then just the one with fidget, one of the things there, fidget tools for people with challenges over concentrated, particularly neurodiverse community people. So they're just a few things that I try to do whenever I'm teaching. I'm sure there's ones that I've missed, actually, and that's what I'd be interested in you identifying. What have I missed here?
Jennifer, this isn't what's something you've missed, but I just want to say thank you so much for including the parents thing. I think that we probably all could be reminded of that. I've just been reminded today, someone late dropping off their preschool child, they were almost crying, and I was just, oh no, it's no worries. Whereas my co-teacher was ready to say to the whole class, you know, you've got to be on time, and and so thank you so much for including that, to be being inclusive, because dropping kids off at preschool is like the hardest thing.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Thank you. And thank you, Judith. Different greetings for sure. That's a big one for them. So I'm just going to wrap up now with the next slide. Just being critical here. We're all on a learning journey. So what I try and do is perhaps listen to TED Talks, I read, perhaps and try to reflect on my experiences. Try to be more inclusive as possible. So I think back about my teaching, about the session that I've just done. One other thing I try and do is that, you know, I'm only human, and so I will make mistakes. So I do check my unconscious bias, become aware of them. And I like that idea of interrupting my thoughts and actions if I'm starting to say something from my past. Like often I used to talk about women and men, and I try now just to talk about people. I try and interrupt myself as I'm thinking and try to be as equitable in my work with my learners as possible. But, you know, as I said, we are only human, and the best thing that you can do ever, if you're not sure about working with people from with diversities, you know, is ask the person themselves. They are obviously the expert. Another thing I do is I scan the room sometimes and just think about, so who's not here, who is missing, you know. And sometimes I try and share those voices, you know, speak for that group. I mean, even though I'm not representative, I try and perhaps ask that devil's advocate question. I bring them into the room. What would someone who is, you know, who lived and used a walking frame, how would they deal with this? Or, you know, ask those questions. So just finishing off now, and a chance for Ngā Whakaaro, so your thoughts and reflections. I just wanted to acknowledge or summarise what we've looked at. So we've looked at the whole idea about being as inclusive as possible with their teaching, looking at some advantages, looking at some approaches, and then thinking about what they can I can consciously do to be more innovative in my approaches to inclusive teaching. So here's my reflective question. What will you do differently from this session today? Because even though it was just an hour, there may be things that you can do in your practice now that will be really, ensure that you are actually being an inclusive educator, working with the diverse learners that we have in teaching. So I'd love to hear from you all, but I know we're going to run out of time, and I just said that I keep to time, so I'm going to tell you what I practice when I preach. But I really appreciate it. A couple of you have put things in there, catching ourselves. Yeah, that's what you do differently. Yeah, if you could write a couple of things in the chat, but it is just a key thing to think about. What will you do that's different? So hopefully you've gained something to think about from this 1 hour session, and follow up with if you want to, with the links that I put in the last slide. I'm just going to close now with here, and then you'll see this last slide here that you'll get as well. Gives you all of the links that you can click into to find out more about inclusive teaching. There's some great ideas and there's great tools that I found useful and what myself like to read more of. But thank you. Again, I can see Amina's going to learn and apply things there. Margaret's going to be more intentional with strategy. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it does take a bit of intentionality. I think that we're of different learning styles for sure. And as I said, I'll all pose with our karakia. Feel free to send any questions. So just pose with the karakia whakamutu. Kia wha, whakaeria te tapu. Kia wā, kia ai, te ara, kia tūrupu, whakataha, kia tūrupu, whakataha. Hone e, kui, pai.
Thank you.